So let's just dive right in. What happens when the absolute cutting edge of science, we're talking quantum physics, starts to sound, well, a lot like ancient Eastern wisdom? That is the explosive question right at the heart of Fritjof Capra's classic book, The Tao of Physics, and it's exactly what we're going to unpack today. You know, this whole thing, it all started with a vision. Just picture it. It's the late 1960s, and you have this theoretical physicist sitting on a beach. And as he's watching the waves, his scientific brain, the one that understands molecules and atoms, it just sort of merges with this incredibly profound mystical experience. He doesn't just think about the universe, he feels himself as part of this giant cosmic dance. And that single moment, that was the seed for this entire book. And, an experience like that, it brings up a pretty huge question, which is really the focus of our first section here. If you're a physicist with a vision like that, how on earth do you reconcile a mystical moment with the totally rational, mathematical world of science? Now, what's so fascinating about Capra is his background. I mean, this guy was deep in the world of high-energy particle physics, but at the same time, he was studying Eastern philosophies like Zen Buddhism and Taoism. And he started to realize that the completely baffling paradoxes he was running into in quantum theory, they felt weirdly familiar to the concepts he was reading about in these ancient texts. To really get why this idea was so revolutionary, we first need to understand the old world view that modern physics just completely shattered. This was the idea of a clockwork universe, and as we're about to see, the cracks were definitely starting to show. So for centuries, Western science was just dominated by the ideas of Descartes and Newton. The universe was seen as this giant, predictable machine. Reality itself was made of solid, separate little building blocks. And here's the most important part. We, the observers, were seen as completely separate from what we were observing. It was this clean, neat split between mind and matter. And you can really see the massive scale of that change right here. What we thought were solid atoms became these dynamic patterns of energy. The predictable machine, well, that became a web of interrelations. The separate observer? Nope, now a participant. Even absolute space and time were thrown out the window. It was a complete and total upheaval of reality as we knew it. Now, just take a look at this. These are the tracks of subatomic particles in what's called a bubble chamber. What you're seeing, it's not little billiard balls bouncing around. We're seeing these fleeting, ephemeral traces of energy, particles being created and destroyed in a constant dynamic dance. The solid, predictable world just kind of dissolves right before our eyes. And this is where we get to the absolute heart of Capra's book, this idea of two paths, one summit. The argument is that physicists and Eastern mystics were basically arriving at the same place, just from completely opposite directions. Just as Capra says right here, the parallels were just undeniable. And get this, he wasn't alone. Other giants of physics, people like J. Robert Oppenheimer and Niels Bohr, they also talked about the resonance they found between their mind-bending discoveries and the wisdom of traditions like Buddhism and Hinduism. But how could this even be possible? I mean, their methods were polar opposites. Physics relied on massive particle accelerators, incredibly complex mathematics, and repeatable experiments. Mysticism, on the other hand, relied on turning inward through meditation and direct intuitive experience. The fact that these two wildly different paths led to a similar summit is what makes this whole thing so profound. Okay, so let's get into the nitty-gritty in Section 4, Unity, Dance, and Paradox. What exactly are these parallels we're talking about? So on the left, you see the result of a particle collision, pure energy converting into pairs of matter and antimatter, which then immediately annihilate each other. And on the right, you have the ancient Taoist symbol of yin and yang. Both of these images are telling the exact same story. A universe that's not defined by static objects, but by a dynamic, rhythmic interplay of opposing forces that are, at their core, fundamentally unified. And here's where things get really weird. A key point is that in quantum physics, reality is paradoxical. A subatomic entity like an electron isn't either a solid little particle or a diffuse wave. It's somehow both at the same time, and what it appears to be depends entirely on how we choose to measure it. Think about that. This super simple diagram from the book shows it perfectly. It can be a concentrated point, a particle, or it can be a spread out pattern, a wave. This is just not something our everyday minds can easily wrap our heads around, and it forced physicists to abandon those simple, clear-cut pictures of the world they used to have. In all of this weirdness, it leads to another just stunning parallel. Both the quantum physicist and the Eastern mystic discovered that our everyday language, it simply breaks down when you try to describe this deeper reality. Our words are tools designed for a world of separate things, and they just fail spectacularly here. I mean, just listen to Werner Heisenberg, one of the founders of quantum mechanics. He's basically admitting defeat. He's saying our common language is totally inadequate to describe what's happening at the atomic level. They had the math, sure, but the words just failed them. And now, listen to this. From the Tao Te Ching, written over 2,000 years earlier. It is the exact same insight. The moment you try to put the ultimate nature of reality, what they call the Tao, into words, you've already lost it. It's beyond language. So what's the takeaway here? What does all this actually mean for us today? And that question brings us to our final section, which Capra frames beautifully as finding a path with a heart. Ultimately, the big idea from the Tao of Physics is that we can move towards a new worldview, one that finally heals that centuries-old split between science and spirituality, between the rational and the intuitive. It's pointing to a holistic understanding of a deeply interconnected universe, a view that is, by its very nature, profoundly ecological. You know, Capra begins his entire book with this very quote, and it's a powerful reminder that knowledge isn't just about collecting facts. It's about finding a path, a way of seeing the world that has real meaning and value. He presents this synthesis of physics and mysticism as one such path, a path with a heart. Which really just leaves us with this one final thought to chew on. If these two great human quests for knowledge, one looking outward to the cosmos, the other looking inward to consciousness, if they are starting to find a common language, to rhyme with one another, then what is the deeper message they are both trying to tell us about the nature of reality and our own place within it?